The field hospital at Forward Operating Base Razor was designed to save lives, not take them. Its white canvas walls, marked with prominent red crosses visible from the air, were supposed to guarantee sanctuary under international law. The smell of antiseptic mixed with desert dust filled the air as medics moved between rows of cots where wounded American soldiers and local civilians waited for treatment. Combat Medic Sergeant Camilla Ross stood at the triage station, her blue medic smock stained with blood from the morning's casualties. At 29 years old, she'd spent 7 years as a Navy corpsman before transferring to the Army, and she'd seen more trauma in that time than most emergency room doctors would see in a career. Her hands, currently checking the vitals of a 19-year-old private with shrapnel wounds, moved with practiced efficiency that came from treating hundreds of wounded under conditions that would break most medical professionals. What nobody at FOB Razor knew, what wasn't in any personnel file accessible to the base command, was that Camilla had another skill set entirely. Before becoming a medic, she'd spent 3 years in a classified special operations unit that conducted direct action missions in denied territories. She'd been trained in close quarters combat, advanced marksmanship, and tactical operations that officially never happened. Then, an IED blast during a classified mission had nearly killed her, and during her recovery, she discovered that saving lives felt better than taking them. She'd requested transfer to medical services, completed all the training, and spent the last 18 months as a combat medic. Her previous life as an operator was buried in classified files with security restrictions that made most intelligence analysts uncomfortable. The official story was simple. Camilla Ross was a medic, just a medic. That story was about to be violently corrected. The attack came at 13:47 hours on a Tuesday afternoon when the hospital was at maximum capacity. 42 patients, 16 medical staff, and only 8 soldiers providing security for a facility that was supposed to be protected by international humanitarian law. The first indication something was wrong came when the radio operator at the command post suddenly went silent mid-transmission. Then the perimeter alarms failed. Then the generator cut out, plunging half the hospital into emergency lighting. Captain Marcus Webb, the hospital's chief medical officer, looked up from the surgery he was performing. "What's going on with the power?" Nobody had time to answer before the shooting started. The sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from the south entrance, not the occasional crack of distant combat that everyone at FOB Razor had become accustomed to, but the sustained roar of multiple weapons firing in coordinated volleys. The distinctive bark of AK-47s mixed with the heavier punch of PKM machine guns. Camilla's combat instincts kicked in before her conscious mind fully processed what was happening. She dove behind a medical supply cabinet, pulling the injured private with her, as bullets tore through the hospital's canvas walls with lethal efficiency. All around her, medical staff and patients were screaming, trying to find cover that didn't exist in a facility designed for healing rather than fighting. Through the chaos, Camilla heard the attacking force calling to each other in Pashto, coordinated, professional, moving with tactical discipline. This wasn't random terrorism. This was a military operation. "Everyone down!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the panic with the kind of authority that made people obey without thinking. "Medical staff, get the patients to the floor, now!" The 8 security soldiers at the hospital were already engaging, but they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Camilla watched 3 of them go down in the first 30 seconds, killed by attackers who were using suppressing fire and tactical movement that indicated serious military training. A figure appeared in the south entrance, an insurgent in tactical gear carrying an AK-47, scanning for targets with professional efficiency. He spotted a nurse trying to help a patient and raised his weapon. Camilla moved without conscious thought. Her hand grabbed the combat knife she kept strapped to her ankle, a holdover from her previous life that regulations said she shouldn't carry but that she'd never stopped wearing. She threw it with the kind of precision that came from hundreds of hours of practice, and the blade buried itself in the insurgent's throat before he could fire. He dropped, gurgling, and Camilla was already moving toward him. She grabbed his AK-47 as he fell, checked the magazine, 30 rounds, full auto, and transitioned to a firing position that was textbook special operations. The medic's blue smock she wore suddenly looked very different when the person wearing it was holding a rifle with professional competence. 2 more insurgents entered through the same doorway, and Camilla put them both down with controlled pairs, 2-shot center mass for each target, exactly the way she'd been trained in her previous life. They dropped before they even realized the person shooting at them was supposed to be medical staff. "Medic with a gun!" one of the remaining security soldiers shouted in confusion. "What the hell? Shut up and fight!" Camilla shouted back, already moving to a better position. Through the hospital's interior, she could hear more attackers entering from multiple directions. This was a coordinated assault. They'd probably studied the hospital's layout, knew where the patients and staff would be concentrated, and were planning to execute everyone inside. The tactical part of Camilla's brain, the part she'd been ignoring for 18 months, came roaring back to life. She assessed the situation with the kind of speed that came from combat experience. Approximately 40 to 50 attackers based on the volume of fire, multiple entry points, security force down to 5 effective soldiers, medical staff and patients pinned down, and maybe 3 minutes before the attackers finished clearing the hospital and killed everyone inside. Captain Webb appeared beside her, his face showing the shock of a doctor watching his medic transition into something he didn't understand. "Ross, what are you—" "Sir, I need you to get every mobile patient and staff member to the operating theater," Camilla interrupted, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd made life or death decisions before. "Barricade the doors. Don't open them until you hear the all-clear signal. 3 shots, pause, 2 shots. Anything else, assume hostiles." "Sergeant, you're a medic." "Sir, I'm also the only person in this hospital with the training to stop what's coming," Camilla said, checking the AK-47's chamber. "Now please get our people to safety while I buy you the time to do it." Webb stared at her for 1 more second, processing the transformation he was witnessing, then made a decision. "You heard her. Mobile patients and staff, move to the operating room now. Immobile patients, we'll come back for you." As medical staff began evacuating the wounded who could move, Camilla conducted a tactical assessment of her situation. She had 1 AK-47 with 30 rounds, a combat knife, and a hospital full of attackers who thought they were facing terrified medical personnel. What she needed was better weapons, a defensive position, and a way to channel the attackers into kill zones where she could engage them on her terms. She spotted what she needed in the corner, the security office where the base guards kept their weapons when they went off duty. Camilla sprinted across the hospital's central corridor while bullets chewed up the walls around her, dove through the security office door, and found exactly what she'd hoped for: an HK-417 automatic rifle, the 7.62mm battle rifle favored by special operations forces worldwide. The weapon felt like coming home. Camilla performed a functions check with hands that remembered every movement: chamber clear, magazine seated, selector switch, optics zeroed. The HK-417 had a 30-round magazine loaded with full-power rifle ammunition that would punch through body armor and walls with equal efficiency. She also found 4 additional magazines, 2 fragmentation grenades, and, in a stroke of luck that felt almost divine, a tactical vest with armor plates that someone had left behind. Camilla stripped off her blue medic smock long enough to put on the tactical vest, then pulled the smock back on over it. The image was surreal. Blue medical garment over military armor, medic uniform over warrior equipment. The first room the insurgents tried to clear was the recovery ward, 16 beds with post-surgical patients too weak to move. Camilla heard them stacking up outside the door, preparing to enter and execute everyone inside. She let them commit to the doorway, waited until she could see 3 of them framed in the entrance, and opened fire. The HK-417 roared in her hands with controlled fury. The 7.62mm rounds struck with devastating effect. The first insurgent went down before he even knew he was being engaged. The second managed to turn toward the threat before Camilla's bullet found his chest. The third tried to retreat but caught 2 rounds in the back as he scrambled away from the doorway. The remaining insurgents outside the recovery ward reacted with professional speed. They didn't panic, didn't freeze. They immediately maneuvered to flank her position while laying down suppressing fire. These weren't untrained fighters. These were soldiers. Camilla was already moving, using the hospital's interior layout to her advantage. She'd worked in this facility for 6 months and knew every corridor, every supply closet, every angle and corner. The insurgents knew the layout from reconnaissance, but she knew it from living here. She posted herself at a corridor junction where 3 hallways intersected, a tactical position that gave her overlapping fields of fire and limited the angles where she could be attacked. 2 insurgents tried to rush her position, and Camilla dropped them both with precise shots that showed she'd done this kind of close-quarters fighting before. "Contact rear!" someone shouted, one of the surviving security soldiers, engaging insurgents trying to flank through the hospital's east wing. The soldier fired a burst from his M4, then his weapon clicked empty. "I'm out!" Camilla pulled one of her spare magazines and threw it across the corridor to him. "Reload and fall back to the OR!" The soldier caught the magazine, his face showing confusion about why the medic was giving tactical orders and had spare ammunition, but he followed the command without argument. Sometimes in combat, you didn't question the person keeping you alive. You just obeyed and sorted out the details later. The insurgents tried a coordinated push, 6 of them moving in tactical formation through the central corridor, using suppressing fire and maneuver exactly the way they'd been trained. Camilla let them advance into the kill zone she'd mentally mapped, waited until they were committed, and then pulled the pin on one of her fragmentation grenades. She threw it with the precision that came from countless training iterations, and the grenade landed exactly where she'd intended, in the middle of their formation with nowhere for them to go. The explosion in the confined corridor was devastating. The overpressure alone was enough to incapacitate, and the shrapnel found every exposed target. When the smoke cleared, 6 insurgents were down. Camilla transitioned immediately to her rifle and put controlled shots into any target that was still moving. In close-quarters combat, you didn't leave wounded enemies behind you. It was a brutal calculus that she'd learned in her previous life. "What the hell is happening?" Captain Webb's voice came from the operating theater, where he'd barricaded himself with the mobile patients and staff. "Who's shooting?" "Stay in the OR!" Camilla shouted back, changing magazines as she moved to a new position. "Do not come out!" She could hear the insurgent force reacting to her resistance. Their radio chatter was increasing, voices showing frustration and confusion. They'd expected to overrun a hospital full of defenseless medical personnel. Instead, they were running into someone who was fighting back with professional competence and making them pay for every meter they advanced. But Camilla knew the math. She'd killed maybe 12 of them so far. That left 30 to 40 still operational, and she was one person with limited ammunition. Unless she changed the tactical dynamic, eventually they'd overwhelm her through sheer numbers. She needed to take the initiative, needed to make them react to her instead of her reacting to them. The best defense was a violent offense. Camilla moved through the hospital with purpose, no longer defending fixed positions but actively hunting. She knew where the insurgents would have to go, the patient wards, the operating theater, the triage area where wounded were concentrated. She positioned herself to intercept them before they reached those locations. In the intensive care ward, she found 4 insurgents preparing to execute ICU patients who were too critically injured to move. Camilla came through the door fast and low, catching them by surprise. The HK-417 barked 4 times, 4 controlled shots, 4 targets down before they could turn their weapons toward her. An insurgent appeared from behind a curtain, his AK-47 swinging toward her. Camilla's rifle was momentarily pointed the wrong direction, and he had a split-second advantage that should have killed her. Instead, she dropped the rifle and drew her combat knife in one fluid motion, closing the distance before he could fire, and driving the blade up under his ribs with the kind of precision that came from muscle memory carved by years of close combat training. He dropped, and Camilla reclaimed her rifle, checked the magazine, 15 rounds remaining, and kept moving. The surgical wing had 6 insurgents moving methodically through it, checking each room for targets. Camilla intercepted them at a corridor junction where the hallway narrowed, creating a fatal funnel that limited their ability to use their numbers advantage. She opened fire from a position that gave her cover while they were exposed, and the confined space turned into a killing ground. She dropped 3 of them in the first 5 seconds. The remaining 3 tried to retreat, but Camilla pursued aggressively, not giving them time to establish a defensive position. Close-quarters combat was about momentum and violence of action. Whoever maintained the initiative usually survived, and whoever lost it usually died. She caught them trying to set up a defensive position at the nurses' station and killed all 3 before they could establish effective fields of fire. The HK-417's magazine ran dry, and Camilla performed a tactical reload while moving to cover, her hands executing the magazine change with automatic precision. Behind her, she could hear more insurgents responding to the firefight, converging on her position. She'd just made herself the center of attention, which was tactically exactly what she'd wanted. Better they focus on her than hunt for patients and staff. But it was also extremely dangerous. Camilla moved fast, using her knowledge of the hospital's layout to stay ahead of the converging forces. She led them away from the operating theater, where the bulk of the patients and staff were sheltering, drawing them toward the hospital's south wing, where there were fewer civilians to protect. In the pharmacy, she found medical supplies that could be weaponized, oxygen tanks that could become improvised explosives if punctured in the right way, alcohol and cleaning solvents that were highly flammable, syringes and medical instruments that could be used as weapons if necessary. Camilla positioned one of the large oxygen cylinders in a doorway, ran a tripwire made from IV tubing across the entrance at ankle height, and then fired a single shot into the cylinder from a safe distance. The tank ruptured with explosive force, sending shrapnel through the doorway at lethal velocity. When 2 insurgents tried to enter through that door 30 seconds later, the tripwire caused one of them to stumble into the cloud of escaping oxygen just as Camilla fired an incendiary round she'd found in the security office. The oxygen ignited with a flash fire that filled the doorway with flames hot enough to be immediately lethal. The insurgents were learning that the hospital had become a death trap, but they were committed now. They'd lost too many fighters to retreat without completing their mission, and their commander was clearly driving them forward despite the casualties. Camilla heard them trying to flank her position, moving through the hospital's ventilation spaces and ceiling crawlways. She grabbed her last fragmentation grenade, climbed onto a medical supply shelf, and lobbed it up into the ceiling space where she could hear movement. The explosion brought down ceiling tiles and 2 bodies that had been trying to maneuver above her. She was down to her last magazine, 20 rounds in the HK-417. Against an enemy force that still numbered at least 20 fighters, those weren't good odds. But Camilla wasn't fighting to win in conventional terms. She was fighting to buy time for the patients and staff to survive, and every minute she kept the insurgents occupied was another minute for potential relief forces to arrive. A soldier appeared at her side. Corporal Javon Mitchell, one of the security detail who'd survived the initial assault. His face was streaked with blood, and his uniform was torn, but he was still in the fight. "Sergeant, I've got maybe 40 rounds left, and I have no idea what the hell is happening, but I'm with you." "Good," Camilla said, checking her ammunition. "We're going to the supply depot. There are more weapons there, and we can establish a defensive position that controls access to the OR." "You're a medic," Mitchell said, following her as they moved through the hospital. "How do you know how to do all this?" "Complicated backstory," Camilla replied, posting at a corner to cover their movement. "Short version, I used to do this kind of work before I became a medic. Now, move." They reached the supply depot, a hardened structure within the hospital compound where medical supplies and equipment were stored. It also happened to be where the base kept its reserve ammunition and a few additional weapons for emergency use. Camilla found what she needed: 2 M4 carbines, 6 magazines of ammunition, and, in a stroke of luck that felt almost miraculous, a M24-9 squad automatic weapon with 200 rounds of linked ammunition. The SAW was a light machine gun that could lay down suppressing fire with devastating effect. She handed one M4 to Mitchell. "You know how to use this?" "I'm Army infantry," he replied, checking the weapon. "I was born knowing how to use this." "Good. Set up on that corner. Kill anything that tries to come through the east corridor. I'll handle the west." Camilla positioned herself with the M249, establishing a defensive position that gave her overlapping fields of fire, covering both approaches to the supply depot and the operating theater beyond. The SAW's bipod deployed. She ran the belt of ammunition through the feed tray, charged the weapon, and waited. The insurgents came in a coordinated assault. They'd clearly decided that overwhelming force was their best option against whoever was providing this unexpected resistance. 10 fighters pushed through the east corridor, while another 15 came from the west, all of them moving with tactical discipline and suppressing fire. Mitchell opened fire with his M4, controlled bursts that dropped the first 2 insurgents through the east corridor. "Contact east!" "Seen," Camilla replied, opening fire with the M249. The light machine gun roared, sending controlled bursts downrange at a cyclic rate of 800 rounds per minute. The 5.56 millimeter rounds tore through the insurgents advancing from the west with devastating effect. The confined corridor became a killing ground. The insurgents tried to retreat, but Camilla kept firing, not giving them space to establish cover or return effective fire. The M249 chewed through its ammunition belt with mechanical efficiency, and insurgent after insurgent dropped. When the weapon ran dry, Camilla had burned through all 200 rounds in maybe 20 seconds of sustained fire. The west corridor was filled with bodies and the acrid smell of gunpowder. She'd just killed or wounded at least a dozen fighters in less than half a minute. Mitchell was still engaging to the east, his M4 barking regularly as he picked off insurgents trying to flank their position. "I'm down to my last magazine." Fall back to the OR," Camilla ordered, grabbing the HK-417 and her remaining ammunition. "I'll cover." She laid down suppressing fire while Mitchell retreated, then followed him, moving through the hospital toward the operating theater where Captain Webb had barricaded the survivors. Behind them, she could hear the remaining insurgents regrouping, but their radio chatter had changed. There was uncertainty now, fear even. They'd started this assault expecting easy targets, and instead had walked into a nightmare. Camilla reached the OR doors and gave the all-clear signal. 3 shots, pause, 2 shots. The barricade shifted and Webb's face appeared, showing shock at the blood-covered medic holding a battle rifle. "Ross, what—" "Later, sir," Camilla interrupted, checking her ammunition. "Down to 15 rounds in the HK-417, 1 partial magazine for the M4. How many patients and staff inside?" 38 patients, 14 staff, Webb replied. Are we going to survive this?" "Yes, sir," Camilla said with certainty she didn't entirely feel. "But I need you to stay in there. I'm going to finish this." She didn't wait for his response. Camilla moved back into the hospital's corridors, hunting the remaining insurgents with the kind of focused aggression that came from understanding that the best way to protect defensive positions was to take the fight to the enemy. She found 3 insurgents trying to plant explosives at the hospital's support pillars. They were planning to bring down the entire structure. Camilla killed all 3 before they could complete the task, then carefully disarmed the explosives they had already placed. In the recovery ward, 2 insurgents were executing wounded patients who couldn't flee. Camilla came through the door and put them both down with controlled shots that ended their massacre before it could continue. Throughout the hospital, she hunted the remaining attackers with systematic efficiency. Some she killed in direct combat. Others she trapped using her knowledge of the facility's layout. A few she simply outmaneuvered, getting behind them before they realized she was there. The last 5 insurgents had barricaded themselves in the hospital's north wing, clearly trying to establish a defensive position. Camilla could hear them on their radios, calling for extraction, realizing their assault had failed catastrophically. She approached carefully, using cover and concealment, watching for ambushes. When she reached their position, she found them trying to escape through a window. She killed 3 before they could exit. The last 2 surrendered, throwing down their weapons and raising their hands. Camilla zip-tied them with medical tubing, secured them to a bed frame, and left them for the security forces that would eventually process prisoners. Then she moved through the hospital one more time, clearing each room methodically to ensure no insurgents remained. The facility was silent now except for the groaning of wounded insurgents and the sound of distant helicopters approaching. Likely the quick reaction force that someone had managed to call before the communications went down. Camilla stood in the hospital's central corridor, surrounded by the aftermath of the battle she'd just fought. Bodies of insurgents littered the floors, bullet holes riddled the walls, medical equipment was destroyed. But in the operating theater, 38 patients and 14 staff members were alive because she'd stopped the assault. Captain Webb emerged from the OR, his face showing the shock of someone trying to process what had just happened. Ross, Sergeant Raw, what the hell just happened here? I protected our patients, sir, Camilla replied, her voice professionally neutral, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. That's what medics do. Medics save lives, Webb said slowly. I counted at least 40 insurgents. You killed them, most of them, by yourself. I had help, Camilla gestured to Corporal Mitchell, who was sitting against a wall looking like he'd just survived the end of the world. But yes, sir, I stopped them. How? You're a medic, you're supposed to be. Sir, before I was a medic, I was something else, Camilla interrupted gently. That something else is classified above your security clearance. But when this hospital came under attack, that training saved your life and the lives of everyone in this facility. The quick reaction force arrived 10 minutes later, 30 heavily armed soldiers who looked ready for a major battle and instead found a hospital full of bodies and one medic in a blue smock standing in the middle of the carnage. The QRF commander, Major Sarah Chen, stared at the scene with the expression of someone trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what should be possible. Sergeant Ross, you're the medic stationed here? Yes, ma'am, Camilla replied, setting down the HK-417. And you did this? Chen gestured at the bodies throughout the hospital. The situation required immediate action, ma'am. I took it. Chen was quiet for a long moment, then keyed her radio. Command, this is QRF Actual. Situation at FOB Razor Medical is complicated. Hospital is secure. Approximately 45 to 50 enemy KIA. Friendly casualties minimal, thanks to actions of Combat Medic Sergeant Camilla Ross. Request immediate investigation and possibly a medal for the most badass medic I've ever encountered. The investigation took 3 weeks and involved officers whose security clearances were so high their name tags were probably classified. Camilla explained her background, the special operations training, the classified missions, the decision to transfer to medical services after her injury. Sergeant Ross, a 2-star general finally said, your previous service is impressive. Your current service is exemplary. What you did at FOB Razor was extraordinary. You saved 38 patients and 14 staff members by single-handedly defeating an insurgent force that outnumbered you approximately 45 to 1. I had assistance from Corporal Mitchell, sir, Camilla corrected. Noted. But the tactical analysis suggests you personally eliminated approximately 42 enemy combatants in close quarters combat while wearing a medic's uniform and using captured weapons. The situation required it, sir. The situation required someone with your unique combination of medical training and special operations experience, the general agreed. Which raises an interesting question. Should we keep wasting your talents by limiting you to one role? 6 months later, Sergeant First Class Camilla Ross stood in a briefing room at Fort Bragg, addressing a classroom full of special operations medics. She wore a uniform that combined medical insignia with special operations tabs. The Army had created a new role specifically for her and others like her. Combat medicine isn't just about saving lives, she told the class. It's about understanding that sometimes the best way to save your patients is to eliminate the threat trying to kill them. You will be trained as medics first, but you will also be trained to fight, because in modern warfare, the enemy doesn't respect the Red Cross. They target medical facilities specifically because they know that's where we concentrate our wounded. She paused, letting that sink in. What happened at FOB Razor shouldn't have been necessary. The Geneva Conventions are supposed to protect medical facilities, but the enemy doesn't care about international law, so we have to be prepared to defend our patients with the same skills we use to heal them. One of the students raised his hand. Sergeant, the report said you were just a medic when the attack happened. How did you know what to do? I wasn't just anything, Camilla replied. I was a medic with additional training that became relevant when the situation demanded it. The lesson isn't that every medic needs to be a door-kicking operator. The lesson is that you can't predict what skills you'll need in combat. So you train in everything, you stay proficient, and when the moment comes, you do what's necessary to protect the people depending on you. The story of what happened at FOB Razor spread through military circles despite efforts to keep it classified. It became a legend, the medic in the blue smock who'd eliminated an entire assault force while protecting her patients. Some of the details were exaggerated in the retelling, but the core truth remained. When 45 insurgents attacked a field hospital expecting to massacre everyone inside, they'd encountered Camilla Ross, and that had been their last mistake. The insurgents assumed she was a medic, someone trained to heal, not harm, someone who would panic when attacked, not fight back, someone who represented an easy target rather than a lethal threat. They learned otherwise in the 90 seconds it took Camilla to clear the first 4 rooms. They learned it again in the 15 minutes it took her to hunt them through the hospital they had intended to destroy. And the survivors learned it when they were pulled from the rubble and realized that the person in the blue medic smock was the reason none of them had completed their mission. Camilla Ross proved that day that medical training and combat skills weren't mutually exclusive. They were complementary. That the person saving lives could also take them when necessary. That the blue smock didn't make her weak, it made her deceptive. They assumed she was a medic. They were right. But they assumed that's all she was. That assumption killed 42 of them and saved the lives of everyone she'd sworn to protect. Some warriors heal. Some warriors fight. Camilla Ross did both, and the enemy force that attacked FOB Razor learned too late that the most dangerous person in a hospital might be the one wearing blue scrubs and carrying a medical bag. She was a medic. She was also a warrior. And when forced to choose between those identities, she'd proven she could be both simultaneously, healing with one hand, fighting with the other, saving lives by taking them. That was Camilla Ross. That was who she'd always been, even when people assumed otherwise. And that was the lesson learned in Blood and Cordite at FOB Razor. Never assume you know someone's full capabilities based on what uniform they're wearing. The medic might also be the most dangerous person in the room, and you won't know it until it's far too late to matter. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to hear more powerful stories of brave women in uniform.